And now it's time for this hour's news review. Iran's parliament has strongly condemned a resolution passed by the UN nuclear watchdog that demands inspections at 2 sites inside of the country. In a statement, Iranian lawmakers said the IAEA Board of Governors resolution is yet another sign of, quote, structural discrimination in the agency. They rejected the resolution as non-binding and a clear indication of excessive demands. The lawmakers asked the government to suspend the voluntary implementation of any additional protocols and IAEA's inspections of Iranian nuclear sites. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf also criticized Germany, France, and Britain for drafting the resolution and described their move as treacherous. I'd like to welcome my guest to this news review, Marcus Papadopoulos, publisher and editor, Politics First out of London, and Sam Mathitorabi, director of Risalat Strategic Studies Institute out of Qom. Thank you both for being with us. Well, starting it off with Marcus, what do you make? Let's start off first with the move of the Europeans and them making this demand from Tehran.
Well, this development is yet another piece of evidence to support the assertion that a vicious and concerted campaign against Iran is taking place in the world at the moment. Indeed, a concerted campaign has been waged against Iran ever since the Iranian Revolution. But in recent years, this campaign has become all the more intensive, and intensive because, in my opinion, Donald Trump is president of the United States of America, and his victory at the American presidential election of 2016 was in large measure due to the support of two of Iran's most dangerous enemies, namely Israel and Saudi Arabia. And mechanisms of the United Nations, such as the nuclear watchdog, have traditionally been used and abused by Western powers, not just America, but also Britain, also France, but also non-Western powers such as Israel and Saudi Arabia. And we have to bear in mind that Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. However, the same cannot be said about Israel. Israel is not a signatory to the NPT, and indeed, the whole world knows that Israel has nuclear warheads. Therefore, I submit this. If the United Nations nuclear watchdog is sincerely committed to seeing non-nuclear proliferation in the world, then why does it not send a team of inspectors, or why does it not make a demand of the Israeli government to allow a team of United Nations nuclear weapons inspectors to visit suspected sites in Israel where Israel actually does have nuclear warheads? It seems to me abundantly clear that there are mechanisms of the United Nations which in theory are very honourable and in theory are very important. However, they are used and abused. And it is my opinion that it's not just Britain and Germany and France who are behind this measure, because we know that those 3 countries remain steadfast in their support to the Iran nuclear deal. However, they are coming under increasing pressure from the Americans. So it is my conviction that the Americans have used the Europeans to do this as a way of causing tension between London, Berlin and Paris on the one hand, and Tehran on the other hand.
Well, Mahdi, your take. I want to look at the Iranian side of things and the response with a new parliament in place now. We have seen quite a strong response. I want to talk about that side of things and the significance of it.
Sure. Well, actually, what has happened in the last couple of days just confirms what the Supreme Leader had predicted all those years ago when this whole process started. Let's remember that at that time he said that he's not optimistic about this process, And also, later on, when the Americans left the deal, he said he's not optimistic about the Europeans. And so actually, all these events that have happened, and of course the reaction of the Majlis, which I will get to in a moment, the new Majlis, is actually confirming that which many of us in Iran had been talking about since the beginning of this whole process, that this idea that there's going to be some sort of a rapprochement, some sort of a strategic, coming to some sort of a strategic agreement with the West is complete foolishness and completely, not based in the reality of what international relations is. This process, we had to go through this process in the country. I'm not one of those who is very, radical on the side of wanting to criticize the government in the sense that, Iran is a democratic country. People have the choice to vote for whoever they want to when the candidates come and offer their programs, and the Rouhani government administration did that. Dr. Zarif did that. The people voted for them, so they had a mandate to follow this path. But many of us, including the Supreme Leader, knew that this is the way it's going to end up. It has now been clearly shown in the field, empirically, as a historical fact, that this rapprochement, this approach, is a failure. Iran got nothing out of it. The only thing that I can say is positive is that the whole world and everybody in Iran who had any doubts about it now has clearly seen the real face of the Americans and the Europeans. And so now, inshallah, we can move on to the next stage where we are able to develop our nuclear program the way we deem fit. And also, it's a very, it's clear that the parliamentary elections, the last ones that we had, and the victory of the principalists was a reflection of the mood in the country. Contrary to what a lot of the propaganda was during the election, people in Iran actually get to vote for who they want to, and people in Iran decided that the previous parliament and the current administration, which is still in power for another year or two, approximately a little bit more than a year, is going to, this approach has failed, and it's time to go to a new approach and to assert Iran's power in a more forceful way. Obviously, also coming in the wake of all the things that the Trump administration has done, including the assassination of General Soleimani.
Staying with you, Mahdi, what about the JCPOA? Dead and gone now? Is it finished?
Yeah, I think it has been dead and done for a long time, but I think Iran is basically waiting for the arms embargo to end at the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, so that it can resume its contacts with China and Russia. Russia's also waiting for that. That's one factor, although, as we know, the Americans or the West will come up with some new thing anyways at that time. So, this is something that's been a concern, and so I think a lot of that is just waiting for that time to come to then put this whole thing to rest and move on to the next politics that we have to pursue.
And Marcus, let's talk a little bit about the Europeans in all of this. On the one hand, you heard what Mahdi was saying, and that it has been obvious for all of those inside of the country of Iran, first of all, about the Europeans, about the Americans. But what about the Europeans themselves? Is it obvious, has it become obvious to them that their governments are not independent, that basically have to toe the line of whatever Washington tells them?
Well, first of all, let me say that the JCPOA is, as a result of America having withdrawn from the agreement, an extremely damaged and extremely weakened agreement. However, the JCPOA continues to survive over 2 years on after the Americans withdrew from the agreement. And the agreement is, to this day, still alive because of the Europeans, in particular the Germans and the French. Now, can the JCPOA continue indefinitely? At the moment, that seems difficult to believe. However, what it will come down to is whether the Europeans, by which I principally mean the Germans and the French, whether they can withstand the pressure being exerted on them by the Americans. Britain, yes, I applaud Britain for remaining a party to the agreement, but we have to separate Britain from Germany and France. Britain is America's most important strategic friend and ally in the world. And I still believe that though Britain is a party to the JCPOA, Britain remains a deadly enemy to Iran.
Okay.
However, the French and the Germans do wish to do business with Iran, but they are strategic allies of America, and thereby they do not have true independence because of that.
All right, and on that note, I'd like to thank both of you for being with me. Out of London, publisher and editor of Politics First, Marcus Papadopoulos, Director of Salat Strategic Studies Institute, Dr. Sam Mahdi Torabi, out of Qom.